So let's start. And Richard, would you like to begin?
Was that addressed to me, Carrie?
Yes, Richard C. Hoagland, would you like to begin?
Thank you. Well, what we have is a very complicated setup here, stretching literally a quarter of the way around the planet. So if everything doesn't work properly, please forgive us. This is a work in progress. There has been so much hype about this comet. My background, among other things, I'm an astronomer. I was curator of astronomy and space science at the Museum of Science in Springfield from the late 60s to into the 70s. And then I went to Cronkite as his science advisor on the Apollo project. I was actually a very tiny part of Project Apollo. I worked for the Grumman Corporation. I actually did their press book, the section on the moon, and it was through that I got an appreciation for the complexities of what the realities were versus what NASA was telling us those realities were. And my work for the last 30 or so years has been trying to synchronize and reconcile the two so that we get some kind of understanding of what we're not being told. Now, in the last several weeks, there has been this extraordinary hype, this internet frenetic conversation about something that is so tiny, such a little tiny speck, that it wouldn't even register on anybody's perception, mainly Comet Elenin. And Tommy, if we can go to the whiteboard, I've got a graphic which is up, which I hope we can take full screen, which shows you just the dimensions of the problem. Because if you didn't know this thing was coming, if you didn't know that there was a lot of anticipation, there'd be no reason to look at it and to imagine that anything untoward would be happening. But there has been this extraordinary hype ever since it was discovered by, if we can zoom in just a little bit so we can center the image in the center of the screen, you can see that this object is insignificant. Celestially, it absolutely, you know, if that, so that little tiny dot in the upper left-hand picture, the little fuzzy blob next to that bright streak, which is a star, taken by an amateur astronomer a few days ago from, I believe, Belgium, if you read the actual graphic, that's Elenin. That's what all this fuss is about. Now, let me have Tommy put up an animation, which we got from JPL. It's part of their applet series. They've done a really great job, the staff there at JPL, in terms of actually providing us with animation, showing us the three-dimensional celestial mechanics. And what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in a bit here, and Tommy is just going to run through. This was the discovery date. This is December 10th, 2010, showing where the comet was almost to Jupiter when Leonid Elenin, who was a Russian astronomer, mathematician, working at an institute outside Moscow, using a remote robotic telescope, was able from his home and the institute there outside Moscow to take 4 CCD images on the night of December 10th, where he discovered this little tiny dot, this little fuzzy dot. And in the lexicon of astronomical literature and in the institutional paradigms, anyone who discovers a comet gets to name the comet after himself. So it is now Comet Elenin in general parlance. Actually, it's C210X1, which is the technical designation, but we'll call it Elenin from now on. And as you can see, if we click on the fast forward, we'll just run through what this thing did and is going to do from now till it leaves the solar system. If you actually go, Tommy, if we can have that now. If you actually go to the animation yourself on JPL, and we'll be posting this link on the Project Camelot archive at the close of the conference, you can see it comes into the solar system, crosses the orbit of Mars. Eventually, we're going to get to Earth here shortly. Goes on past, goes across the orbit of Venus, into the orbit of Mercury, then back out. Its closest approach is in September. We'll get to the details here in a minute. And then it exits the solar system, crosses the orbit of Mars, headed back toward Jupiter, headed back toward the outer solar system, and that's it. Now, the object itself, which astronomers really aren't seeing yet because it's so far away, it's just crossing the orbit of Mars today, which is one of the reasons why we kind of chose today as the time to do this. This object is less than a mile or two across. We're not seeing the actual nucleus as comets have. We're seeing something called the coma, which is that fuzzy ball of light surrounding the entire center construct. If we can go now to some of our animations here, let me pull up the first mystery, which I would like to present for everyone to address, and that is simply this. If we can get rid of the animation and go to the whiteboard again, to my first graphic, we've got two different takes from two different institutions on the most important part of this comet or this object, that is, what is its period? We have to reduce that a bit, I guess. On the right-hand side, you see from the JPL people the orbit portrayal of what's called a hyperbolic object. This means it's on an orbit which has never entered the solar system before and is never going to enter the solar system again. It's an open trajectory. It's coming in from interstellar space. It's going back to interstellar space. It's a one-time visitor, and that's how NASA officially, according to something like 1,200, 1,500, 1,700 observations, has now categorized this object. On the left-hand side of this graphic, in red, is the orbit that Elenin himself has calculated. And it's very different because he doesn't call it a hyperbolic object. He calls it a captured comet with a very curious 13,000-year period. Now, why is that intriguing? Because 13,000 years is exactly half the precessional cycle of the Earth on its axis in alignment with the center of the galaxy and all the furor around 2012. So we have two very different political positions. We have NASA's position that this thing has never been here before, will never be here again, and we have Elenin, the discoverer's position, and he is a mathematician and he can do these orbit calculations exactly, and his calculation says it was here 13,000 years ago and it's going to be here 13,000 years from now, and that's exactly half the precession corresponding to the Mayan calendar, to Carl Kalaman's work, etc., etc., etc. So we have a very interesting political dichotomy, and the crucial thing to remember here is that we're dealing with exactly the same data. They do not intend, apparently, to agree. So why don't they want to agree? Well, let's go back to my next slide, or if you want to take me, I guess you can, and we'll get rid of this graphic, and we'll get rid of this graphic, and we'll get rid of, whoops, we don't want to get rid of that one. Okay, sometimes these whiteboards fight you. So let me see. Let me get to number 2 here. Okay, Tommy, can we take this one? All right.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm not hearing you, Carrie.
Okay. Could we make sure that the speakers are all muted who are not speaking at this moment? We are hearing dishes and someone breathing very heavily into their mic. So it would be nice if whoever that person is could please mute themselves. Thank you.
Okay, what I want to do now is I want to step through some of these graphics. This board does not like to respond to our commands all the time. So what I need to do in real time is to repaint the background. I think I can do that. And give it a proper designation here. Here we are. Okay. And we'll do this. Okay. And I'll give you the next graphic. So you ready to take this one, Tommy? Okay. This is, if you can center that. This is a still of the JPL animation I showed you just a moment ago. This shows you now exactly where the comet is. It's at the edge of the orbit of Mars, just about to cross the orbit of Mars. If you look in the lower left-hand corner of this graphic, you'll see two distances, Earth distance and Sun distance. That's a kind of a two-dimensional plot showing the distance from the center of the solar system and the instantaneous distance from the Earth. Okay, now let me try to get rid of this. No, wrong button. Yes, okay. And I'll put up number 3. Now, there's going to be a very important event that's going to happen in about a month. At the end of July and the beginning of August, Elenin is going to cross the orbit of the Earth at about, well, we can actually see the distance, at about 1.5 AU. And an astronomical unit, an AU, is 93 million miles. So about 1.5 times our distance from the Sun. The comet was going to cross the Earth's orbit at that moment on or about August 2nd. Now, August 2nd is important for another reason. I'll get to that in a minute. Why this is really interesting is because, and we'll pull down our next graphic, on that particular date, this object, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. That was a mistake. Let me go back to number 3. Actually, let me get rid of this. Let me scroll down and find the, okay, I don't see the graphic I wanted to show. I'll tell you what, Tommy, let's go to the second animation, and you can actually show people what I'm going to be talking about there. This is another JPL applet which was prepared showing the intersection of Elenin with a very interesting spacecraft that NASA has in orbit around the Sun, one of a pair of solar observation satellites called Stereo A and B. And if we can zoom in, you'll see that in the Earth's orbit, ahead and behind, these two solar spacecraft are very nicely positioned. Now we're looking down from the ecliptic pole, and Tommy's going to zoom in, and in a minute he's going to start the animation, and you'll see, you can actually see there two objects labeled Stereo A and Stereo B. These are objects in the Earth's orbit, slightly inside and outside, so that they lag a little and they lead a little. And what's going to happen is, as the comet comes through, from the end of July till around the 2nd of August, that period of a couple, 3 days, on the 2nd of August, it will pass closest to Stereo B, which is the second NASA's solar spacecraft. There, you saw it, it's coming in on the upper left-hand corner. It's moving toward Mars. All right, now there it is. Okay, and we'll stop. Let's back up to the 2nd of August. There. That distance is about 4.5 million miles. This object is going to be only 4.5 million miles away, and NASA is planning to turn that spacecraft around, and instead of pointing it at the Sun like it is now, it's going to be pointing and tracking the comet, so it's going to get all kinds of interesting data, visual images, multispectral data, composition data, and we're going to know a great deal in about a month about the composition of the gases being emitted by this object, by this quote, and I'll put the word quote in quotes, comet, as it passes the only sentinel that I'm aware of in the solar system that's going to get as close to it as this object. In fact, if we now go back to the animation, just press forward, you'll see that as we move forward in this animation, the comet leaves Stereo B, it leaves the Earth, it crosses ahead of the Earth, and then moves out of the solar system. That closest approach to the Earth, which if I can go back to my whiteboard now and show you this, I believe, okay, this closest approach to the Sun is very interesting, because one of the things I've been doing in trying to separate the fact from fiction and the hype from the reality is I've been looking at the JPL data and what's called the ephemeris, which is the published orbital plots which are used to create these animations and to basically publicize where the comet is so amateur astronomers all over the world can go outside and take pictures with their telescopes and their CCD cameras. What I found extraordinarily curious, and I said this last night on Coast, this object comes closest to the sun at a distance of 0.482 astronomical units. That's less than half the distance of the Earth to the sun on September 11th. That's not really possible. That date, that such politically charged date, is one of the first indications that this object may not in fact be a normal object. So let me move quickly here so we can get to the rest of our speakers. If we get rid of this and we pop up this graphic, we can see that as we move past the closest approach to the sun on October 17th, again, another very interesting date, at a distance of 0.232 AU, that's 0.232 times the Earth's distance to the sun, this object will cross in front of the Earth. In other words, it's just about to cross the Earth's orbit. If you look in the upper right-hand side over here, and you'll see that it's at a distance of about 22 million miles. This object, this comet, whatever this thing is, and it's certainly not a brown dwarf star or Nibiru or anything like that, this little tiny object, which, again, remember, we're not seeing the object, we're seeing the coma of gases around the object. No one yet with any telescope has actually spotted this object because it's so tiny in the dark out there at the orbit of Mars. This little tiny object crosses our bow at about 22 million miles distance, headed out of the solar system, and if it weren't for the fact that it does it on very interesting times and dates and angles, none of us would be having this conversation this morning. So let's go to our next graphic. Let me get rid of this, and we'll go down to number 6. Here we are. This is now where things get really interesting, because on November 8th, now remember the comet has passed us on the 17th of October, closest approach. On November 8th, as it's leaving the solar system, headed out, not quite to the orbit of Mars yet, something very interesting is happening in the Earth's environment. Another celestial object, which we haven't talked about at all, called 2005 YU55, a so-called asteroid. And if we can go to the animations, Tommy, and you can pull that one up. This little tiny object, which is also on the JPL website, is coming across the Earth's orbit, and in fact is coming closer to us than the moon. This object is going to pass, and Tommy will get the animation up here in a moment, it's going to pass something like 200,000 miles from the Earth. Now, this is not Elenin. This is a totally different object. We now know from the JPL and Arecibo radar measurements that were taken in the spring of last year, in April of 2010, that it's something like 1,500 feet across. It appears to be spherical, which is very strange for a little tiny object that is of such small size. And as you can see here, if we can click on the animation, you can actually see that this object is going to cross from the 8th through the 9th and is going to, there we are, it's going to literally cross from the direction of the sun at right angles to the Earth's orbit. It's going to pass behind the moon. That's the moon up there traveling in orbit. And it's going to be totally unheralded by anybody in the press because everybody's attention is focused on Elenin, which is at this point several, probably 30, 35 million miles away, heading out of the solar system forever, if we can believe JPL's orbit plot. So this is an object that seems to be part of this very strange mix, this strange equation, because as we'll be talking about later in the morning, something this small, 1,500 feet across, should not be spherical. Oh, one other thing. This object appears from the Arecibo radar measurements made earlier last year to be rotating very, very slowly. They're saying it's once every 20 hours. Joseph Farrell and I were discussing this the other day, and he got as intrigued with this as I did, because small asteroids, typically because of something called the Yakov-Jacobs effect. They spin very rapidly in a few hours. They're claiming this object is spinning in something like 20 hours. In fact, because of the ambiguities of the radar measurements, it could in fact not be rotating at all. Now, what does that sound to everyone like it might be? It sounds to me like it might not be an asteroid. In fact, it could be something much more interesting, which is coming across our stern while everybody else is looking across our bow at Comet Elenin leaving the solar system. So now we'll go back to the graphics. I've only got a couple more here, and they're really important, as you're going to see. Let me see if I don't do this just right. I cannot get rid of, all right, let's just move on here. Let's try this one. Okay. This is now where Elenin is going to be positioned on November 9th. Remember, we just had this weird object which is going to zip by us in the night on the 8th and 9th. Well, on November 9th in the United States, our Federal Emergency Management Agency has been asking all the broadcast networks to relinquish control of their television stations, their networks, their broadcast facilities for a FEMA Homeland Security test on the 9th of November, exactly in the same time frame as this little tiny object, YU-55, is crossing our stern closer to us by several thousand miles than the moon. Again, interested people would look at this and they would say, if they were really paying attention, is this all somehow synchronized? Is the FEMA broadcast, is it intended to in fact prepare for something that may or may not take place in the inner solar system? Well, we won't know the answer to that until November 8th and 9th. But I must say that I find this very curious and worthy of attention, and the fact that we are being diverted by all this attention to Elenin, I find rather curious. Now, if we go forward to my next graphic, you'll see here that we now have plotted the position of Elenin on the 11th of November. 11, 11, 11. Why have we done that? Because if you look at this object, if you look at Elenin's position in the solar system, and I guess there's a little time lag in our streaming, so I'm not seeing up on the live stream the graphic, but we will shortly. There we are. Okay, you can plot the position of Elenin in the upper right, the Earth, Mercury, and Venus, and let me call up my next graphic, which is here, and lo and behold, you see that they are all exactly in a line. They are in perfect alignment in the solar system. And I believe I have another graphic down here, which is this one. Let me see if this works. Okay, oh, I'm sorry. I have to go up to this one. There we are. If you look at the solar system edge on, if you look at the Earth in plane in terms of the ecliptic, you can see that the comet over there on the left, marked C, and then Earth, forget Mars. Mars is in the background. It's not part of the alignment. Earth, Mercury, and Venus are all in incredibly tight alignment. When you put all of this together, including some data at the JPL website itself in terms of the times when they've been posting things, when you look at the orbit inclination of this object, our conclusion at Enterprise is that Comet Elenin is not a comet. Or if it is a comet which has been specifically thrown into the inner solar system in a precise celestial configuration in terms of timing, distances, orbit inclination. All its parameters have been designed to fulfill some strange ritual observation. In other words, this is not a natural object, or if it is under some kind of artificial control, because the odds of all of these coincidences if you tally them all together, multiply them all together, they come out to be millions to one that this could all be happening by accident. So the hype about Elenin is interesting. It's giving us clues that someone thinks this object is incredibly important, and they're trying to lay positive feelings on the object and instead instill overwhelming fear. And they're trying to do this apparently to cover up some mission that whoever has directed this object into the inner solar system has for all of us. And all I can say is that the fall is going to be extraordinarily interesting. And in the words of my late friend Arthur C. Clarke, something actually very wonderful could be coming. Over to you, Carrie.
Okay, Richard, very, very nice, very good presentation, and I appreciate all of that. Okay, so what we should do now is just go to around sort of to the rest of the people, and we would like to talk to, I guess, Keith. Are you ready to present yourself?
Yeah, I just unmuted it. Yeah, I can present myself. Yeah, basically, I'm mainly an independent researcher, and I started looking into these kinds of matters in terms of the ancient mysteries. That's what my website's called, Ancient World Mysteries. And I've been looking at things like, essentially, the initial focus was on validating ancient systems of measure like degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc. And in looking at whether or not there was some kind of energetic significance or basis to these measures, and that they were not just arbitrarily chosen. And they go back, when we talk about degrees, 360 degrees to one circle. They go back to ancient Babylon and Sumer, about 6,000 years or so ago. And I was initially interested in proving that the Earth, if it was possible, did indeed once have 360 days to one orbit around the Sun, and that would validate imperial, these measures themselves. And I found that I could prove that with some laws of proportion, which were an extension of the laws of Kepler. And I also validated imperial measures themselves as we use them, like feet, fathoms, inches, and so forth, as a nested set of special units, which are not just arbitrary extensions of distance, but of wavelength measures. And when I did these initial studies of the solar system, I found that the solar system and most of its variables were all slightly out of harmony, and I could backtrack them into an unusual state of harmony using special laws, which I do think are physically valid. And I also looked at how ancient structures appear to have been based and built on these dimensions of imperial measures, and how they seem to have been sited around the globe in special places based upon ratios, musical ratios, even linked into the Earth's form and its basic components, has an ellipsoid body. And not only did I find that for structures like Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid, I found that even military installations today were built with the same considerations, and there were even a connection to the five-sided pyramid on Mars, seeing the same considerations as Stonehenge were in play to site that one. But I mean, in terms of looking at things like Elenin and that, my focus here, and what I can at least bring to the table regarding this object and regarding some of the theories around it, would be that a lot of people are saying that it could be Nibiru, and they're thinking of the work of Zecharia Sitchin, and they're thinking it's a large mass body of some sort coming into the solar system. And I agree with Richard, it's a complete speck of, very small. But I would also argue that the Nibiru, or Sitchin's Nibiru, does not even exist as such. And some of his early theories on this work seem to, I think, be in error. And there's certain mythologies and certain physics that I can at least present to at least nullify the idea that it's Nibiru. I mean, in the work of Sitchin himself then, when I was looking at some of the imperial measures of feet, fathoms, inches, and a unit I call an ideal geographical mile, which is precisely 6,000 feet. When I started looking at these, I wanted to go further than just show that they were as unit distances important in a kind of a pattern sense. I wanted to see if I could prove that they were energetically significant, and I found the proof of principle by evaluating nuclear weapons tests and also earthquakes. And I uncovered what seemed to be, and developed a theory about a certain mechanism, I believe, that is in play in the solar system that actively causes earthquakes. And this seems to explain far better some of the work of Sitchin, or some of the things he's looked at that made him hypothesize Nibiru as an object. And what I found was this: all the planets, the sun and the moon, all appear to be engaged in a continuous exchange of matter, and that this is through what some people have called a quantum potential, instantaneous transmission from one body to another, and that in a natural course of the orbits, the planets will go into stress states, and each planet is essentially radiating out its harmonic signatures, and this is why the ancients call it the music of the spheres. With each planet radiating out its own unique signature, they each receive the signatures of all others. So in the normal ordering, the normal course of their orbits and their mechanics, they enter into certain special configurations, and these are stress states. And when they achieve these stress states, and they achieve certain special harmonic resonant signatures relative to one another, it initiates a matter transfer from one body to another. And if you have a lump of matter, say, withdraw from normal space just under the surface of one body, you'll have a geological disturbance there. And if it is transmitted faster than light speed, essentially instantaneous, through a quantum potential, and it emerges under the surface of another body, you will have a geological disturbance at that end. So you've got a geological disturbance at each end, highly targeted, and you can predict earthquakes even to extreme accuracy years in advance. Now the USGS says there's about 1.5 million earthquakes strike the Earth every year. Most of those, though, are very low. And in terms of actual data, earthquakes of 5.0 to 5.9, there's only about 1,300 of those. And then there's about 130 or so of the next point up, and there's about 17 for that. And then there's only about one a year on average, 8.0 and above. So out of the 1.5 million, you can almost see that it goes down to background noise. But the ones definitely of high magnitude stand out with special signatures. And just to prove the point, I did an analysis of the Japanese earthquake, which occurred on March the 11th of this year. Now, if this is caused by resonance, we should see evidence of resonant patterns. And if you have, say, the sun emitting a wave-like disturbance of some spectrum, and that energetic disturbance is of a certain wavelength, and it hits the Earth as a body, if it fits in some way to the fundamental dimensions of the Earth itself, it should trigger a standing wave pattern to be established within and cause the body to be agitated. Now, with the Japanese earthquake, we know earthquakes and we record them the moment they happen, so we know the precise universal times down to the nearest second when they occur. And the Japanese earthquake was March the 11th, and it was 2011. It was 5 hours, 46 minutes, 24 seconds universal time. With that information, you can use an astronomical package to get from the center of the Earth. If you draw a straight line, freezing time at that point, from the center of the Earth to the center of the Sun, that line will pierce through the surface of the Earth on the ground, and I call it the sun-ground position. And if you work out using the most advanced model we've got for the Earth form, the WGS 84 model, which is an ellipsoid model, if you work the arc length out from the sun-ground position at the moment the Japanese earthquake took place to the epicenter as recorded, which is 58 degrees north, and I don't know the exact coordinates, but I got them to hand. But they were cited from the Australian government official website. But if you work out the arc length from epicenter to sun-ground position, and you do the division sum, equatorial circumference of the Earth divided by that, you get a value of bang on almost 6 to 1. And I'll show you this little thing here. This is the actual calculation that you would get from doing it. Both values here in feet. This first one is 131 million or so, is the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And the one here on the other side is the arc length from the sun ground position to the epicenter. And if you do the division, you get this value here, 5.9999, and then all the other numbers, almost exactly a 6-to-1 fit. And what this implies then, to me, is that you've got a standing wave established. And I can also say, although this is just for the sun, the moon as well was involved in this, and also the latitude was a special latitude which made the site just off Japan particularly vulnerable. Now, if you look at the data for this, and you were to take the equatorial circumference of the Earth and divide it by 6, and compare it to the arc length as devised, you get a difference of just under 300 feet. In 1 second of time, right, the Earth rotates around the on its axis with respect to the sun, right, and there are 86,400 seconds in 1 day. In 1 second of time, the sun on the ground will sweep out about 1,500 feet near to the equator. So when I'm telling you that there's about a 300-foot discrepancy here, I'm telling you that that earthquake occurred with split-second timing and could have been forecast even years in advance in terms of the pattern. And this is the resonant signatures that you get that are involved in earthquakes. And it's highly classified because the same science is used to trigger nuclear explosions or even to transmit matter through special pathways. Now, once I'd worked out this system, that resonance was actually a process in the universe, it led me to go back to Sitchin's theory about Nibiru. Sitchin hypothesized a large mass intruder body, right, to explain what he saw in the Sumerian and Babylonian texts as the agitation of the gods, and the gods are celestial bodies. So what he did then, he also said that the asteroid belt was created by a collision of this large mass intruder body which hit another body which was itself quite large in mass, orbiting where the asteroid belt currently is. He said that it was called Tiamat, that body already in the orbit, the asteroid belt position. Part of it broke off to form the Earth, and the moon of Tiamat was detached and came trapped around our Earth, and that's our moon now. And he then went on to say that this Nibiru planet then went out and was locked into a 3,600-year orbit, highly eccentric. But the thing is, you can explain this far better, and in Sitchin's book, he almost has the key right there. He mentions something in his book, the 12 planets, right here. He mentions something about the certain Russian astronomers. If I'll just read this one line out, he's discussing the asteroid belt, and he says, "Beyond any doubt, this is the debris of a planet that had shattered to pieces. Russian astronomers have named it Phaeton, which means chariot. Now, in ancient Greek mythology, there's a story of Phaeton as a character who is the son of the sun god, Apollo, and it's best described in a work by Ovid. This is Metamorphoses. Ovid's a Roman poet born in 43 BC, and this book, Metamorphoses, is a description of all the tales about the Greek gods and so forth. And
okay, Keith, I'm sorry to interrupt you here because we are running over on all our intros here, and I understand that what you've got here is extremely complicated, and I think that people listening might be having some trouble following you. Is there a way we can kind of focus it a little more on this planet, Elenin, and perhaps wrap this up for this part of the discussion, and then we can maybe wrap some of the other things you're talking about back into this discussion later on?
Yeah, well, all I was basically going to build up to was just to say that the process of resonance, right, can trigger planetary disruptions across the board, and this can give us like geological disturbances over the Earth. But the other thing is, you can get small objects like comets, which can get caught up in powerful resonant configurations, and then they can do exotic things like flare up. And Comet Holmes, for example, which flared up on the 24th of October 2007. When that flared up, just as a point, there was a really accurate Earth-Mercury conjunction. And a lot of people are focusing on the Earth-Mercury conjunction the 29th of September 2011. So there was various things that you can have between celestial bodies that can cause unusual exotic effects. So in some of the myths, for example, the sun itself can shut off its light by being cancelled through standing waves. So you can almost have the exact opposite. And again, that's in certain esoteric traditions. I could go on to that at some length, but maybe that'll come in later. But as far as Elenin goes, though, I am of the view, at least just to close here, that it is a small mass body. It's not a large mass body. And that its significance may possibly be in that it could do something unusual, or even the other objects Richard was talking about could do something unusual if they get caught up in powerful resonant configurations. So that's what I wanted to at least say initially.
Okay, thank you, Keith, very much for that. So let's go around to Carl Kalaman now. And Carl, I know you were on Coast last night. I did listen to you, and you were saying some very interesting things. Why don't you go into perhaps some of that, but also introduce yourself. Some of the people may not be familiar with your work, depending on who's out there. So thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. My name is Carl Kalaman. I originally got my PhD in physical biology from one of the Nobel committees in Stockholm, and I later spent 10 years as senior researcher at the University of Washington in Seattle in environmental health. And but in 1979, I made my first journey to Mexico and Guatemala, and was fascinated by this culture. And already then I heard that the Mayan calendar, the long count, would come to an end in the year 2011. And when I came back to Sweden at that point, I actually gave a talk to my colleagues mentioning this fact. So I'm certainly one of the persons that have been, for the longest time, has said that there is a meaning to the Mayan calendar, and started to think about what this particular meaning could be. Then I basically left my previous career as a university scientist in 1993 and took on to make the Mayan calendar understandable to average modern people, you might say, because it's not something that's just on the face of it is immediately understandable, and it may not even help to hear the way that the Mayan elders look upon it themselves, because they are not relating it to the bigger modern worldview, so to speak. And if I can show my first slide here, let me see. Then what you see here then is something that is a very important metaphor for the Mayan calendar system. This is a pyramid, the pyramid of the jaguar in Tikal. And this you may use as a metaphor, as an image to understand the way that the Mayan calendar system is organized. Basically, it's organized in 9 different levels, and each of which is developed by a particular wave that is 13 different energies, a wave movement of 7 peaks alternating with 6 valleys. And this is a model that the Maya would use. And the only existing inscription that we have from the ancient Maya about what will happen when their calendar comes to an end is the Tortuguero monument. And what this one says is that some entity, which I think the pyramid is an obvious metaphor of, some entity called Bolon Yokte Ku will manifest in his full regalia. What that means, in my understanding, is that the 9 waves, the energies of the 9 waves, because Bolon in Mayan language means 9, basically the Bolon-yok-te ku means the 9-step God, or the 9-support God, they also say. And as you can see here, you have 9 supports. And these are 9 waves of evolution, starting with a bottom level that starts with a Big Bang 16 billion years ago. And what this tells us is that the Mayan calendar system covers about 10 billion years before our own solar system came into existence. And this is an important conclusion, because what that means is the Mayan calendar is not possibly based on any cycles, astronomical cycles in our local solar system. The Mayan calendar is a divine calendar. That's why they call it the sacred calendar. It's a calendar of creation, and it's truly a cosmic calendar that applies to the creation of the entire universe. And you might say that the creation scheme that as they understood it, was to climb level by level by level up to higher and higher levels. And these levels are each developed with waves that have higher frequencies. In fact, there is a 20-time increase in frequency every time you climb to a higher level. Now, as of March 9th of this year, the 9th wave, the highest wave of the Mayan calendar system, was activated. And these all waves are going to be completed on October 28, 2011 of this year. So what this means is that when the 9th wave was activated, a wave of creation of a much higher frequency than any one of the lower waves was activated, and it came to have quite a dramatic effect. So this is the basic creation scheme of the Maya, and the way that the calendar works is that if you look at these different peoples, is that to the left you have just the 5 highest of the waves, and then you can see 5 faces that have different kinds of filters on themselves. And these filters emerge because of a resonance phenomenon of the human mind with the cosmic tree of life, and also the earthly tree of life, which is basically the polar axis that creates different mentalities in different directions. So for us to be in resonance with any kind of a wave, we need the Earth and its division into west and east as a resonance unit for the cosmic information that is creating the universe. So and then, because of these filters, as you can see here on this screen, they tend to favor different aspects of the mind. Like the 6th wave favored the left brain half. And so that's the analytical mind and all that. So that's 5,000 years of male dominance in the world, basically. Now, the 7th wave, it started in 1755, and it created then a person who was completely insensitive to the spiritual energies, a dark filter. And that's the era of industrialism that started in the mid-1700s. Now, the 8th wave creates a person that is favoring the right brain half, and that started in 1999, and it has created a person that emphasizes holistic thinking, many aspects that I won't go into. It's a return of the feminine, obviously, and so forth. But then the 9th wave that you can see here at the top, it actually creates a person again who does not have any filters. what this means is it's a person that experiences the unity with everything. And it's a person that is endowed with unity consciousness. And this is what we are experiencing now. The 9th wave that started on March 9th, it has activated a transformation of the planet to create a civilization based on people with unity consciousness. What happens then when this was activated is almost like I would say very chaotic situations have come forth. Sorry here. So what you see here is basically the timeline of the 9th wave. It starts March 9th, 2011, and then it goes through 7 different pulses until all of creation completes itself on October 28, 2011. And so the reason we see so much chaos and an increase in chaos in the world now is that the world that has been created by these lower levels of consciousness is not consistent with this incoming unity consciousness. So people in the epicenter of these changes are basically North Africa and Southern Europe. And people in these countries are simply starting to say they don't want any form of dominance. Even in a democracy since quite some time, like Spain, people are saying we don't want the political class. We don't want dominance. It's not revolutions where some new group or person or party or something will take over. They're just rejecting the whole idea that some people should dominate others politically, economically, and so forth. And they are affirming the sovereignty of the human soul. So there's a lot to say about this, because part of the earthquake in Japan was activated right when this wave started. And it was, what I had predicted was not exactly where this earthquake could be, but I said, there is a frequency increase here. We will have 20 times higher frequency will be activated on that date. And as a result, you saw in a very short period of time how there was an earthquake in Japan, there was a nuclear crisis in Japan, there was a new war in Libya against the background of revolutions going on in 12 different Arabic countries. And the news magazine Newsweek simply exclaimed, "Apocalypse now." The world was going crazy. And it's all because of this frequency increase that this wave brings into existence. So this is a general background, because the perspective of the Mayan calendar is not 26,000 years or a million years or something like that. It is 16 billion years. It's all of evolution, all of creation, all of divine creation. And it's not based on our local solar system, but it's expressed here as well. And so how does that come in? Well, the interesting thing now is how to look at from a more prophetic perspective. And I should say that I have no hands-on experience of astronomy, and I really don't doubt so much what comes out of the astronomical observations regarding these comets. What I find interesting is the timing of this in relation to the cosmic plan. And I've said for 15 years that the December 21, 2012 end date is like a pop culture end date. It has no relevance whatsoever. And it's very clear to somebody who knows the Mayan calendar that the end of the calendar could not be a date that has the energy of 4 Ahau. It has to be 13 Ahau. And October 28 is 13 Ahau, and it perfectly fits these waves. The real experience of how we are now going into a state of deepening chaos, because the world is based on dominance and dominance over nature, and it's the unity consciousness that eventually will be the basis for the creation of a new world, and that will come only as of October 28. Now, what I pointed in here in this scheme is three different positions, and the first is the closest, the point A here is the closest distance from the Earth to the comet Honda. And the point B is the closest distance of the comet Elenin to the Sun, and the comet C is the closest distance of the comet Elenin to the Earth. And it just happens to come exactly when the calendar comes to an end. And so what I want to think about, and what has made me think, and what I wrote recently in an article that is posted on my website about the comets and how they're relating, is how do they relate to the ancient prophecies? And my suspicion, and I know I'm not alone with that, is that the comet Elenin is the blue star of the Hopi prophecy. And we should, also be, what I've also studied is a number of end-time prophecies coming from sort of, you might say, humble Christian people in Europe, of simple farm girls in Portugal or in Bosnia, or people having visions. And what they have, the way this has been summarized is that they often talk about a sequence of two different comets that are associated with this, as well as the idea of 3 days of darkness that also Don Alejandro Oxla, the head of the Council of Elders, told me about, that the Maya embrace a couple of years ago. So I think this is really what I want to point out, that now this is the sort of end time scenario of the Mayan calendar, and what is really important is that they are messengers, these comets. At least in my mind, that's what's important. They are messengers, and they're messengers for us to participate in this transformation of consciousness. And just a last point here, if you look at, you might have heard this. You might have heard the other part of the Hopi prophecy, which is that it's not coming back. Oh, there we go. That when the blue star comes, then the Kachina will take off his mask and stop dancing. And that's really what you see here on the ninth wave. It's a person without a mask. That is the person of the future. And I believe Elenin is the blue star, and it is a signal of the birth of this new world that will come out after 16 billion years of evolution.
Sorry, thank you very much, Carl. Okay, so at this time we'll go to Joseph, and I'm afraid that these are all running quite long, but please bear with us. We will extend the conference as long as we can to have a very substantial discussion. Obviously, there is background that everyone needs to understand where each speaker is coming from. So Joseph, if you don't mind, if you would go ahead. Thank you.
I just got cut off, Carrie, and I'm just now getting back. All right. For those who don't know me, I'm Joseph P. Farrell. I'm kind of an independent researcher. I did my PhD at the University of Oxford in an academic discipline called patristics. Most of my research has revolved around the idea of hidden or suppressed science and how it interfaces with history. I've done a lot with ancient texts and trying to coordinate ancient texts with modern science and modern physics, modern biology, and so on and so forth. I basically am going to try and keep it short, Carrie. My comment on Elenin kind of dovetails with what Richard said earlier. My approach has always been to assume that there was an ancient cosmic war that was fought in the solar system, and that as a result you had some surviving elites that tried to reconstruct civilization to bring it back to a pitch of scientific development. And when I'm looking at Elenin, I'm trying to put myself in the position of what the world's elites now might be thinking. And from the standpoint of ancient texts, and Richard and I have talked about this a little bit prior to the conference, but from the standpoint of ancient texts and what they say about possible extraterrestrial influence, I prefer to call them the genetic cousins, because if you take those texts seriously, they indicate that there was some sort of genetic engineering of mankind, the human species being kind of a chimerical hybrid of hominids that were here and another species. So there had to be kind of a genetic resemblance to begin with in order for that story to be true. So I'm thinking in terms of a scenario that possibly that group might be coming back. Now, if we accept that for the sake of argument, let's put ourselves in the position of the world's elites now. What would they be thinking? And they've got to be thinking one of two things, and they're caught in their own methodology, and that's what I like about this, because their methodology for influencing the politics of this planet has always been pressure from below and pressure from above. In other words, they have always sought to dominate and influence the middle class in between. Well, now they're in the position, if they are thinking in terms of Richard's argument, that this comet might possibly be either an artificial object or a natural comet that was launched into an artificial orbit with all the periodicity that indicates a precessional phenomenon. If they're thinking that, then they are getting pressure from above, namely something that is out of their control, and they're trying to maintain their hegemony here on Earth. So I think it's posing a very interesting scenario for us. We've really got to have a good panel discussion on what we think the analysis of this event, plus the asteroid, the spherical asteroid, which is in itself a little suspicious, but we've got to really have a good panel discussion on the possibilities, the analytical possibilities that this presents to us. And I'll keep my initial remarks at that point, Carrie, because I know that you're limited on time.
Okay, well, thank you, Joseph. That was very succinct, I must say. So I think that I don't think Andy is back with us quite yet, and I guess that takes care of everyone except me, and I will try to keep my remarks very short, and that's actually not such a problem here. Basically, I have been getting whistleblower testimony indicating that Elenin is a piloted craft, and this initial, and if everyone could mute themselves in the background there, it would help. But this information came initially from a sort of a deep source within NASA, I guess you could say in general terms, and also from another source that I can't name. And then on top of it, I've been getting some communiques from what is in essence a Chinese whistleblower, and there is some discussion as to whether this is actually a whistleblower or whether it's the Chinese intelligence agencies and or any other intelligence agency putting out disinfo or trying to lead Camelot and others astray, knowing that we're going to do this conference. But I would say that it is very clear that over the past week we have been hit by nonstop what we call DOS attacks on our websites, denial of service attacks. And today they were particularly strong. For all I know, the sites are down again as I speak. People have been emailing me behind the scenes here. So what that indicates is that someone out there is trying to interfere with this kind of a dialogue, especially what we find is where people will, experts or, sort of specialists in this field, as all of you are, comparing notes is very dangerous to the powers that be. And I think that all of you should keep that in mind, because going forward, what usually happens is people give presentations, and never compare notes, never have an open dialogue between them so that they can put pieces of a puzzle together. And as many will know, this is all what Camelot is about, is putting pieces together to get the big picture. And so that takes many, many people to actually create a picture that's got depth and all the proper dimensions, you might say. We seem to have some connection issues behind the scenes as well. But at any rate, so that's kind of the sum total of what I've been getting, is that it is a piloted craft. Now, that is what made me decide to do this conference to begin with, to get together this group of speakers and go forward. And when I contacted Richard Hoagland, I was very interested to hear that some of his contacts had actually verified the same information behind the scenes. And this other comet, which is, I'm not sure how to say, I know it's 2005, something like UTU or YU, YU, and then a couple other numbers, I think it's YU 55. Apparently that is coming from the direction of the sun. We have other information coming to us at this time that is telling us that this is, again, another piloted craft. Now, I've been given several angles to look at this, and one of the angles is the idea that this particular comet or asteroid that we call Elenin not only is called Horus, if you translate it, as Richard Hoagland has said, but on top of it, it is moving quite slowly if you put it in context with the notion that we have interstellar travel at this time by with regard to our secret space program. And the idea being here that if we have people that are already going interstellar and are using what I believe is at least light speed, if not beyond light speed, in order to do so, then you have to understand that if we were indeed being visited or revisited by the Anunnaki in the form of Horus, which I do believe is a very real possibility, by the way. And I do want Andy Lloyd to do his presentation, because I certainly honor his so-called fictional books on this matter, and encourage many people to read them if you are in doubt, because I believe that he is on the track of something very interesting. But at any rate, the idea here being that if they are able they were already very highly technologically evolved when they interfered with our DNA all those years back. And if you study the work of Michael Tellinger and put that with the work of Sitchin, I think that will paint that picture for you. But at any rate, so what you have are spaceships that are not only parked next to the sun, and have been, if you look at the work of John Walson, and you can do a Google search on his name, he made himself quite famous by posting those pictures of the craft near the sun. Quite extraordinary vehicles, I must say. I was told by one whistleblower that some of those craft were several miles in length and even bigger than the comets that we're currently talking about, so that they are much more a force to be dealt with in a certain sense. And we also had, by the way, Dan Burish, for what it's worth, did validate that Walson's photographs of crafts near the sun were authentic. And that was quite a few years ago. So you have craft near the sun that we've known about. You have craft in the rings of Saturn as well. And then you have what we understand to be a secret space program that's occupying bases on the moon and Mars. Now, I understand from the work of Joseph Farrell and some from comments of Hoagland and Richard, I would love it if you address this in our conversation, which will happen just shortly. The idea that the people that are actually in the secret space program and have gone off planet are really the Nazis that we recall from the past, and that what we have currently here on Earth is another secret space program, that involves the elite, but that there are forces trying to keep them on planet and not allowing them to go out, perhaps even to visit Moon and Mars, although my information from other whistleblowers is that this is not the case. So we can have an interesting dialogue on that score. But the idea being that, yes, Elenin appears to be piloted from our testimony. However, it's moving quite slowly. This may be for public consumption and not what's really going on. It does seem to be also accompanied by other craft. It may be being escorted in by our own UFOs, or it may be being escorted in by various ET races that are monitoring this progress for some reason. Now, what it contains is very interesting, and I am also very interested in hearing sort of what I was told to read, Arthur C. Clarke, Rendezvous with Rama, and I did so. That brings in the idea of the robots and androids visiting the Earth and the whole Wingmakers material. So at this point, I will stop talking and move this into a conversation format, and then we can pick up pieces as we go along and try to touch on all the different ideas that have been raised here in the next hour or two. And then at some point, Andy Lloyd will join us, and we will allow him time to give a brief presentation at that time. Okay, so please go ahead, and what we will do at this time is, if you want to speak, just please do so. Try not to talk over each other. At some point, Tommy, just for ease with Tommy, you might raise your hand in the screen like this, to let people know that you'd like to speak, and that will help Tommy with directing the camera. All right, thank you.
Well, I do have a couple of comments. Carrie?
All right.
First of all, I want to react to what Keith said, because I think that he's definitely onto something, but I'd like to add an additional idea. We know from our own hyperdimensional work, and Joseph and I have discussed this extensively, and I'm very intrigued to see that Keith's work complements what we've discussed and what we've published so elegantly, that there are these geomantic and celestial resonances, which is a very nice term. And as you have planetary alignments in the physics of the hyperdimensional model or the torsion field model, you can get these resonance points where interesting things can happen. However, we also know from the work of Farrell and myself and some others that for instance, I'm thinking of Richard Dolan, that post-World War II, we had this real breakpoint. We had this real split where you have a bunch of guys, yes, they're Nazis. They started out that way. They were heirs to all that research and black technological development at the end of the war that was frantically going on, that Hitler and Himmler and the others called war decisive, which Farrell and his colleagues have now figured out is actually the hyperdimensional torsion field technology that I've been discussing. The Russians have been researching. In other words, there's a huge convergence of a lot of separate research and research ideas all coming to the same place. Well, if you posit that you've got those guys out there, a human breakaway civilization equipped with stunning technological tools and the equivalent of magic. My friend Arthur Clarke used to say, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, it's because with this technology, it is magic, because it not only impinges on the physical world in terms of energy, anti-gravity, biology, potential immortality if you apply the right medical techniques learned thereof, but it also directly influences consciousness. And the more that I look at the tapestry of events now going on as we get to the end of the Mayan calendar, and that brings us back to Carl's seminal work, the more I really believe that we're looking at both a backdrop of natural physical events being modulated by various natural cosmic forces. And we've identified some in the solar system that do the modulation, basically the positions of the planets around the sun, their configuration relative to each other, how fast they spin, and unusual interlopers that come through the system like comets from time to time. Someone with a master computer, a master plan that has understood this physics at a very deep level could put this all into some supercomputer and figure out on such and such a date, such and such an effect will happen. And then if they want to interfere with that background cosmic field, that resonance pattern, they can interject their own plan in that pattern to screw things up or to shift the curve in the direction of whatever their agenda is. I believe the breakaways, which I'll use as a general term, over the last 60 years, not only because of their own R&D on this planet, that then continued when they moved off planet to bases probably on the moon to start with, and then on to Mars and other places now in the system. Remember, they also have had now 60 years of access to all those ancient ruins and libraries and machines and extraordinary Type 2 level technology, which is all out there in the solar system, which we are not privy to because we, in essence, in this model, have been confined, have been quarantined to this planet alone. All 6.5 billion of us now who are not part of this breakaway civilization in this model that is supported by so much of Dr. Farrell's work, I believe we are being told to stay home. And under no circumstances will you ever leave, ever again. That's why I think the president canceled President Bush's plan to go back to the moon with Constellation. The night before Obama was going to receive his Nobel Peace Prize, which is an interesting window into some thinking, he saw, and a lot of other folks saw, in space this incredible apparition over Norway, the so-called Norway spiral, which I think was a blatant sign you will not do what you're planning to do as part of your Peace Prize plan. And from then on, a lot of things that we saw trending in the data, in the politics in Washington, with the NASA space program, with all of the other background political developments moving us into a robust off-planet position, all of that came to a sudden end. And I can see Joseph with his finger up, so obviously he has something he wants to add, so take it away, Joseph.
Yeah, let me add to that, Richard. The thing that you have mentioned in several of your works is this idea of ritual alignments, and I want to add 2 comments to what you've just said. The other thing we have to remember about the Nazi technology that I have been discussing in the books about the Bell and the torsion physics and so on and so forth is that much of that technology appears to have been inspired from esoteric sources, Indian, Sanskrit, Demona texts, and so on. So they would be natural people to look to find the type of programming that you're talking about for these types of programs to throw a monkey wrench into this cosmic plan and so on and so forth. The second thing that I want to mention to you is that in esoteric tradition, in occult tradition, there is the idea that the moon, the orbit of the moon, forms a sort of quarantine or boundary beyond which mankind is not to go. So that plays also very well into your scenario that this secret space program has basically been warned off the reservation by somebody. Could be Nazis, could be somebody else. But when we add all of this into the mix with the possibility that Elenin is either an artificial object or is a natural object launched into an artificial orbit, when we put all that in there, then the stakes go up because we're looking possibly not only at one player that's off-world, that is possibly humanity with possession of advanced technology, we're also possibly looking at another player that originated off-world. So this scenario is very, very complex. That's my comment.
All right, let me pick up on that. And then I think Carl has something he wants to say. Because when I was listening to Carl, I was very struck with the idea of these huge background cycles, these waves, these, as I would term them, changes in the hyperdimensional physics, which impinge directly on consciousness and are modulated locally by the dynamics of the solar system. If we can go back to the work of the RCA engineer, whose name escapes me at the moment, back in the 1950s, who actually showed his employers that the sun is being modulated by the positions of the planets, and that in turn influenced radio signals, because they were basically hiring him to try to figure out why they couldn't send radio telegrams at certain times because of sunspot activity, and at other times the sunspot activity was conducive to them making money and, you know, fulfilling their customers' needs, et cetera, et cetera. And he was loath to use the term astrology. But in fact, this is a hyperdimensional astrology. So, Carl, if your waves, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, are being modulated locally, and the ultimate impact is on consciousness, which is the highest epitome of the expression of physics in three-dimensional reality, this HD physics, then I want to introduce into Keith's model the idea that by calculating down to the exact second the Fukushima earthquake and saying that it was due to these natural configurations of planets, let me introduce another possibility. If we have bad guys who are trying to basically take control at this crucial time in the physics, Carl and Keith, of human consciousness, like they tried desperately to do on September 11th, because if you look at the celestial configuration, you can see in the dynamic of the hyperdimensional model that a whole bunch of very cool things were supposed to happen, and instead we had this incredible injection of horror, loathing, fear, and we've been living a 10-year nightmare ever since, put upon us by folks who figured out that if they intervened in the physics at that crucial moment, they could change the conversation and change a positive trend curve into a desperately negative trend curve. This polarity that you described before, I'm seeing all over, the same way you're seeing it, but I think it's because it's being diddled with locally by folks who do not have our best intentions and our best future at heart. Given all of that, we suddenly have this apparition called Elenin. Well, if we can go to the whiteboard, Tommy, if you're paying attention, please take the whiteboard. You will see on the whiteboard an object. This is a close-up image of a comet, another comet that NASA flew by a few months ago called Hartley 2. And this comet, if you take a close-up look and we can center it and you zoom in, that's not a comet. That is an ancient, derelict spacecraft. In fact, as I go through the archive of all of the objects that NASA has visited, both asteroids and comets over the last 10, 15 years, they in fact all look somewhat like this. They have geometry, they have shattered geometric structure, they look like they're basically an artificial device that's been beaten to hell in a handbasket, has gone through the wars. This one, Hartley 2, can be seen emitting gases, emitting solid particles of carbon dioxide. It has the most amazing spectrum of elements that are being ejected because they're being warmed by approach to the sun from inside. I believe if we would ever get close-up images of Elenin, that this, in fact, is what Elenin may look like. This object is about 1.5 miles to 2 miles long, and obviously much narrower, and it's got symmetry. In fact, on the JPL video that was recorded live during the encounter of the spacecraft with Hartley 2, you can hear the gasp of the engineers and them saying, "Oh my God, it looks like something out of Star Wars." That's before the video cut off and they went back to their politically, correct definition of this thing as a comet. If we're dealing with folks that have set an ancient artificial object on a course to come through the inner solar system now, to coincide with Carl's 9th wave, to coincide exactly with his 9th wave, because these guys, whoever has set this in motion in this scenario, are trying to intervene and interfere with this physics to take control of human consciousness at this critical nodal point in the field where we can make one of two decisions. We can go up or we can go down. And judging by the last 10 years, there's very strong forces that wish us to go down, and it's up to all of us who are paying attention to make our decision to go in the opposite direction and not subscribe to the fear. The fear porn being spread about Elenin tells me that in and of itself, Elenin is potentially an extraordinarily positive intrusion in this little nursery, sent by someone to lift us up. As Arthur used to say, something wonderful is coming. And all the incredible propaganda against that model is because someone's trying to take control of our consciousness at this critical moment in this ninth wave, Carl, and to divert us into the darkest side of human history.